All right, as we're going through today, we're going to look at some history for the lumberjacks in northern Minnesota. So refill my coffee and move around here, get ourselves set. This is going to go along and follow with this graphic organizer. The front of the graphic organizer is kind of where we're at up until we see the 6 pictures, and then you're going to flip over to the back. So this video specifically is going to go through 1 through 5, and then kind of this backside is on you as we go through this presentation. I'm going to blow this up big and probably pull out my own version so I know exactly what it is that you're looking at when you're working on this. Talking about lumberjacks, we have a bunch of lumberjacks all over northern Minnesota, northern Michigan, southern Ontario, Manitoba, northern Wisconsin, western Wisconsin, pretty much anywhere kind of north of where St. Cloud would be on a map, but explicitly and specifically located in the section up north, kind of bordering the Iron Range as we go through there. And they use land that was sold, and you'll notice sold there is in quotations, by Native American treaties. This process is pretty similar to what we're able to see from kind of what Walt Disney even did down in Florida. And when the lumberjacks got their land was sold from Native American treaties. This was often because the treaty would be written in a different language, which we looked at when we did our Dakota unit, or when that land was purchased by an individual who never wanted the land. Here's the process. If I would like to become a massive lumberjack owning individual who has many forests under my control and I harvest lots of timber, but I know that no one else wants me to do that, I'm going to get my friends to all buy small parts of a forest, and then they're either going to give it to me or they're going to sell it to me later on. This is the same process that was used by Disney down in Florida when he was working on Disney World. The state of Florida didn't want Walt Disney to own all of that land, and so he created fake companies which all purchased small parts of the land, and then they happened to sell it to Walt for a very cheap price. This is a proxy purchaser, and the lumberjacks did the same thing. If we have Geving Lumber and Timber Company who wants to buy all the land around St. Peter, well, St. Peter isn't going to want to sell to the Geving Lumber and Timber Company because that's one person getting too much power. So instead, maybe I have my brother buy just a little bit of land, my sister, whose name isn't Geving anymore, she buys a little bit of land, maybe my mom buys a little bit of land, my friends buy a little bit of land, and then they just happen to sell it to me for a cheap price, or they sell it to me for exactly what they bought, and pretty soon, even though I didn't buy all the land, I've now got access and control over all the land. So the land that the lumberjacks got was often through very shady business deals, and it was pretty much stolen by a lot of the Native American tribes who thought they were selling to many people, but instead were just selling to one specific individual. The most common ethnicities are coming from Finland, Sweden, and Norway. And we can see that when we go and look at names, when we just looked at names in our Civil War unit and identified a lot of the Johnson name. Well, the Johnson name is both a Finnish and Swedish name. And if we were to look around, we'll see that there's still remnants of these lumberjacks on our last names today. In the 1860s, the term itself, lumberjack, is just jack as a generic term for a person, specifically male, and then lumber, of course, is timber and wood. So it'd be a person from the woods, lumberjack, just a generic name for somebody from the woods. A few different jobs, and I'm on question 3 right now on your graphic organizer. A few different jobs by these guys. The cruiser specifically was somebody who walked around the woods and would make a mark on a tree, and that mark would be along with the axeman. The cruiser kind of walks through a selected section of land, making sure that this is the border of the land that we're cutting down. They're going to then make an offer onto that land. So before somebody sells land to a lumber company, they go off and have a cruiser walk through and say, you know what, there's not enough trees for us to cut down here, it's not worth it, or there's enough trees and the land is worth this price. The cruiser is kind of the person who goes and identifies what they're going to sell the land or buy the land for. The axeman goes with the cruiser, and the axeman puts a notch on a tree, which will then be identified to be cut down. Not all trees in the forests are going to be cut down. Sometimes the cruiser is specifically looking for white pine, or specifically looking for a balsam or spruce. Often it was pine. Pine is a cheap lumber, and it's a decent construction one. The sawyers are the ones, sawyers, it's both, are the ones who did the actual cutting, and the sawyers or sawyers were the ones who were going around. They often went in a group of 2 to cut down trees. Depending on the size of the tree, you might need more than one specific person. After the tree is fallen, then comes the swamper, and the swamper's job is to remove all the branches. So you just get the trunk of the tree. The branches are discarded, they're not used, they're put into a giant pile, and they're burned. The sawyers, again, are going off and they're cutting the logs into manageable pieces. And by manageable pieces, we're going for roughly a 12 to 15 foot log that's got no branches on it. The skidders then take those logs and they pile them up, and they bring them from the forests to the rivers. The scaler is a super smart one. The scaler's job is to go off and estimate the cost that that log is going to sell for. Oftentimes, the scaler is going to take a pile of logs, and we'll look at that in our pictures here. You take a pile of those logs and you say, these would be worth this price. And then they're quoted as they go down to the sawmill. Every lumber company is going to go off and send all their logs together down the river to the sawmill. So the foreman is going around and using a brand or a specific style of cut to identify their logs. Most commonly it was a brand. This is done during the winter time, and there'd be a gigantic bonfire with all those cut off branches, and that bonfire would have multiple brands inside of it. A brand is a piece of metal that's superheated, and then when you put it on something, it leaves a mark. So each lumber company would have their own brand, and they would leave a mark on a log, which would then be floated down with a bunch of others to the sawmill. The sawmill, again, is getting a bunch of logs from a bunch of different companies, and they are not doing this for free. The lumber companies are paying the sawmills to create from a log to create a board. And so the sawmills need to know who are they charging for each of those specific logs. They're looking at what the foreman's marks were. And the last most exciting job is a river pig. A river pig is somebody who is riding the logs, which we can change that, riding the logs to the sawmill. Logs to the sawmill. So what job, for question number 4, what job would you pick and why? So think back to what these descriptions are. What job might strike out for you? If you're somebody who likes being alone, perhaps a cruiser would be a good job for you. If you're someone who likes a lot of control, but there's a huge risk. If you do it wrong, you're losing money. If you like control, maybe the foreman would be a good one. If you think that, you know what, you've had a good run of things and you're ready for a little adventure, well, maybe a river pig would be a good one for you if you are a good swimmer. And we're going to see specifically their job in a few slides from now. If you're someone who wants to get swollen strong, a sawyer would be a good one for you. If you like animals, well, the skidders, they're using oftentimes horses or mules. So maybe if you're a good animal person, a skidder would be a good job for you. What job did you pick? Make sure you put down the Y. Now, let's talk money. As we are going through, we've got a few different bills. This says 2023. I haven't made it updated from today in 2025 or whenever you're watching this video. But this is our monthly salary for those jobs. If you were a foreman, you're getting about $125 a month. A sawyer, depending on your experience, you're at $70 to $80 a month. Same with the river pig, $70 to $80. Our swamper, $50 to $60, and the skidders, $40 a month. How much is that in today's dollars? Well, if you are a foreman, you're getting around $4,000 a month. Sawyers, $2,200 to $2,500 a month. River pigs, $2,200, $2,500. A swamper, around just a little bit under the $2,000 a month, depending on your experience, and skidders at just over $1,000 a month. Now, you're not paying for things like room and board or for food. That is coming as part of your contract. So you're going to sign a contract to work for a lumber company for anywhere from one winter season to multiple winter seasons. This log jam is the most famous log jam, and you're going to see there's a link down on the bottom, the Taylor's Falls log jam. Taylor's Falls is on the border between Minnesota and Wisconsin. And as you take a peek to look at this picture, this log jam took 200 people 6 weeks to clear. And it is all of those combinations of different lumber companies putting their logs down the river to the lumber mill. In order to clear this out, after these lumber companies spent multiple weeks, they finally started to put mountains of dynamite through these piles of logs in order to blow up the logs in order to clear the log jam. There is a river underneath all these logs. This is the St. Croix River that these logs are floating on. Well, it won't take much for you to understand that if you were to take a bunch of dynamite and put it into this picture and blow up those logs, that there's going to be an adverse, which means a negative effect. And that negative effect is so many splinters. As these logs exploded, there were a few casualties, and this is the worst log jam in U.S. history. There are a whole bunch of people inside of here. You'll see this is a person there. Take a moment and see how many people you're able to notice. What's camp life like? Well, you don't have much control. The average day for a lumberjack is not at all theirs to control. Around 3 to 4:30 in the morning, depending on your job as well as depending on how hard your company was going to work that winter day, was wake-up time. You would, of course, wake up sooner if you were the cook. Cookie was the nickname for every camp cook. You'd wake up earlier than 3, but most of our workers, most of our sawyers, logmen, river pigs are going to be on a different schedule because you work during the summer. Everyone else works during the winter. The skidders, everyone works up around 3 to 4:30 depending on your company. It is time for breakfast. We'll see a picture of what breakfast looks like in a few, but you should note that during breakfast, no one is allowed to speak. During all meal times, it is super quiet. Take a moment and reflect upon that. At 9 o'clock, it is time for your break. After you're already out in the woods, you're doing your job, you get 10 minutes. Most of our lumberjacks are going to sit down, pack a pipe, which means to smoke a pipe, and they're going to just kind of hang out. There is no snack at 9 o'clock. At 5:30, it is supper time. Again, no one is allowed to speak. 6 o'clock to 9 o'clock is free time. If there is a treat in camp, there might be a pot of hot water outside if it is a treat. Otherwise, there might be a pot of water or there's probably no water. Depending on how busy that cook was that day will depend on whether or not cook had time for an extra bath pot. The longer serving worker, the person who was around the longest, gets to bathe first. It starts with the foreman and it trickles down our rung. If you had just started on a lumber camp and you were not in an important position, you might be the last person to bathe, which means that water is not fresh. That water is the same water that everybody else was using to take their bath with. From 6 to 9, there's some free time. You're lucky if you've got time to take a bath. Again, it is winter, so it didn't happen very much. There's dancing, music, and then tall tales, which we'll look at in a different lesson. Around 9 o'clock, or a little early, it is lights out, quiet, bedtime, no one speaks. Most lumberjacks are going to find it quite easy to sleep, especially because wake up is coming in just a few hours. Now, I mentioned something twice, and I would like you to take a moment and respond. Why would lumberjacks not be able to talk at the table? How come during mealtime lumberjacks aren't able to talk? Did you figure it out? The reason that lumberjacks wouldn't be able to talk is because they're on the clock. They're on the clock from the moment that they sign up to be a lumberjack to the time that they end. If you are the person in charge and you're paying a group of guys to do a job, if they are eating, what are they not doing? Well, if they're eating, they're not doing the job they're supposed to do. And if they're talking, then they're not eating, which means they're not doing the job they're supposed to do. By having a silent meal time, it does two things. First, it makes it so that it's not super duper loud. But more importantly, it speeds up that meal time so you can get your workers back to work quicker. If people are able to take a long breakfast and a long lunch and a long dinner, then they're going to just not be doing the job that you're supposed to have them be doing, which is working. If you're talking, you're not eating, and if you're eating, you're not working. Now we've got some pictures. I am not taking the time during this video to go through these pictures. I'm going to read the picture, but keep in mind this is part of your graphic organizer, so you need to do your response. Sometimes this video might be an interaction video where you'll have to pause and respond. Other times you won't, but I'm just going to narrate what these pictures are. This is picture 1, and this is a Sunday afternoon. Sometimes on Sundays, specifically in the afternoon, from noon onward, it would be your half day off. So your question for number 1 says, describe the living conditions of these guys in their timber camp. Picture 2 is an empty bunkhouse. Your question here asks for you to look at the objects that are used and what some of those objects are. Note, here's our kitchen. There's the back of the kitchen. And behind, you're going to see some bunk beds. This is the same picture. It's the same building. This one is the same building. So here you've got it empty. And then on picture number 3, what do you notice about the meal time? What do we see? We know that this is winter. Because it's winter, what might be in these cans that these guys aren't going to get fresh during winter? What might be in these cans? Who do you think this guy's job is? Take a moment to notice what they're wearing. Look at their outfits. Do they look like they just did a whole day's work? Yes or no? How clean are they? For image number 4, you're going to see what type of tools. There's more than one specific type of tool, so take a moment and look at this fallen tree. We know that with this fallen tree, we know what these guys' jobs were. Look at the size of this tree. These guys are on a cross-cut saw, and they're doing a demonstration. This is a picture that took place a little bit after the lumberjack era is completed, and they're kind of showing how they would cut down one of these trees. We're going to see the pile of branches that our second group of sawyers. They went off and they stripped all the branches from the tree. This is strange. What might that be? What is he doing? Why is he on something like this? Why is he standing on the ground, but he is not? What would you have to do first to do this job? And what is this bottle? This bottle is an old style flashlight. This bottle would often be filled of some sort of oil. There's a metal hook, and then there's going to be a wick that would come out. Because lumberjacks, and this is winter time, remember, so the sun comes up and sets early, comes up late and sets early, they would take a bottle, which often had some sort of kerosene or a flammable liquid like oil inside of it, and they would use it like a portable candle, and you would stab it into a tree, light the wick, and you'd be able to see around what you were doing until the sun came up or after the sun set. What's this guy doing? Well, he's a little bit shorter than this guy. In order to accurately use the saw, and it's easier to keep your hands lower than it is to have them higher, he's put in a plank, and this plank allows him to stand up. This would also happen if our tree was at a huge angle, and so if the person down below had to be at the same height as somebody who's up top on a hill, well, they would put in just a board in order to raise you up. Picture 6. Picture 6 is called a hot pond, and the hot pond is where logs would wait. It is hot because of the exhaust. There's pipes that go under from different cooking, from steam machines from the sawmill. And this hot pond is where logs would kind of sit and wait until it was time to send them down. This question says to look at whose job it might be to clear the log jam. So I'm going to look at my description of whose job is supposed to go out there and clear the log jam. It's called a deadhead. You'll see these. This is a picture that I took when I was canoeing in the Boundary Waters a year ago, and a deadhead is still a remnant of Minnesota's logging history. It is a submerged log which is barely floating underneath the surface. It's called a deadhead for the obvious reason that if you hit the head, you're often gonna get hurt. These logs are incredibly heavy. They're waterlogged, and they're weighing a few hundred pounds. They're barely floating, kind of like an iceberg. There's a small part above the water and a huge part below. About once every 2 or 3 years, a boatist inside of Minnesota is going to be perished or flung out of a boat because they'll be cruising along on a speedboat or a motorboat, and they're going to hit a deadhead, which is barely above the water or just below. And at the speeds that motorists can go sometimes on lakes, these will shred boats. They will just be like hitting a concrete pylon. This video is one that I'm going to skip, but it's going to show you what life as a river pig was like. Got to skip it because otherwise it messes up with how our recording is. And that's where I'm going to stop, because this game is one we can't really do.